Hi everyone, I'm back to read Growing Up in 1864 from Happy Birthday, Addy, a Springtime Story, Book 4 from 1864. Growing Up in 1864. When Addy was growing up, babies were born at home. Midwives were usually called in to help. Midwives are women trained to help other women with childbirth. In slave families, older women such as aunts or grandmothers were often experienced midwives and helped younger women deliver their babies. People didn't know as much about good health and medical care in Addy's time as we do now, so many mothers and babies died during childbirth or shortly after. On farms and plantations in the South, enslaved women had to work even when they had young babies, so older girls or elderly women took care of the infants. On some plantations, women could bring their babies with them to the fields. They often carried their babies on their backs as they worked. As the babies grew older and became toddlers, they played with the other children, both black and white, who lived on the plantation. Slave children often became friends with the children of the plantation's master. Sometimes these friendships lasted for many years, but black children soon learned that they were treated differently from white children. Sometimes enslaved children were told to call the master's children young master and young mistress. As the enslaved and white children on plantations got older, their lives became more separate. Many white children went to school, but it was against the law for slave children to go to school in much of the South. Instead, slave children had to start doing chores when they were about 8 years old. When enslaved children weren't working, they were allowed to play. Boys loved marbles and girls loved to play with their dolls and to jump rope. Toys were simple and homemade. Dolls might have been made out of corn husks or rags. Hide and seek, running and jumping games, and ball games also were popular. Children still enjoy some of the singing games played by slave and free children in Addy's time. Ring Around the Rosie and Sally Walker are two of them. Slave children and their parents also liked to tell stories about Brer Rabbit, a clever rabbit who loved to play tricks. These stories were based on African tales about a hare named Wakema. Brer Rabbit stories are still told today and are an important part of American folklore. By the time enslaved children became teenagers, they were treated as adults. They worked long hours just like their parents. Most married in their late teens and started families of their own. Before the end of the Civil War, marriages between slaves were not illegal. So enslaved people developed their own marriage customs. For example, jumping the broom was part of many slave weddings. A couple might jump over a broom to end the ceremony. Slave owners often ignored slave marriages and separated couples by selling off the husband or wife. Most couples who were allowed to stay together formed long and lasting marriages. When the Civil War ended, large wedding ceremonies took place in the South in which 50 or 100 couples who were former slaves were married at the same time. In most areas of the North, both black and white children could go to public school, though they usually went to separate or segregated schools. In most states, children weren't required to go to school by law, as they are now, though most children attended school for at least a few years. City girls and boys usually quit going to school after the age of 12 or 13. Some young people, both white and African American, went on to high school, but few people went to college when Addy was young, and those did not go were usually boys. After teenagers left school, many began to work to earn money for their families. Until they married, most continued living at home with their parents. It was hard for black teenagers to find work because many white employers could not hire African Americans. Most young black people who did find work were poorly paid. During the Civil War, many teenage boys left home to fight. Some soldiers were 16 and younger when they joined the army. A few were as young as 12. Girls and their mothers also helped the war effort. They prepared food and clothing for soldiers, made flags, and raised money to help sick and wounded soldiers. Almost every American knew someone who was injured or killed in the war. In fact, as many Americans died in the Civil War as in all other American wars before and since combined. The war changed the lives of all Americans. Many children lost a brother or a father in the war. Some families who lived near an army camp or battleground had their homes and possessions taken away from them. Children like Addy celebrated the end of the war for many reasons. The end of the war meant the end of slavery, the end of suffering caused by the war, and the hope that families would finally be together again. All right, and that is the end of Happy Birthday, Addy, Springtime Story, Book 4 from 1864. Hope you liked it.